knew Wagner mercenaries had a heart. But the death of Yevgeny Prigozhin and his comrade Dmitry Utkin has cut them deep. They laid red carnations outside the Wagner headquarters in St. Petersburg, where Prigozhin grew up, became a violent criminal, was sent to prison, came out and ran a hot dog stand and a restaurant, and made friends with Vladimir Putin, all before starting the notorious Wagner private military company in 2014.
It feels like losing a father. He was everything to us. We were always waiting for a word from him, our Uncle Zhenya.
Prigozhin's plane fell out of the sky yesterday evening, according to Wagner telegram channels, shot down by Russian air defences by traitors to the motherland. Today, investigators were at the site, but they're unlikely to conclude what many believe, that this was a spectacular assassination ordered by a man who today said he was just catching up on what had happened.
As for this plane crash, first I want to express sincere condolences to the families of all who have died. It is always a tragedy. And indeed, if there were people from the Wagner company, as the initial reports suggest, I'd like to say they made a significant contribution to our common cause of fighting the neo-Nazi regime in Ukraine.
Even after Prigozhin met military leaders in Rostov-on-Don in June and announced he was mounting an armed insurrection, the president met his old friend and allowed him a safe passage to Belarus. But you don't get to challenge Vladimir Vladimirovich. Prigozhin was a dead man flying.
I knew Prigozhin for a very long time, since the early 1990s. He was a man with a complex destiny, and he made serious mistakes in his life.
Earlier today, Putin met with tank crew who had destroyed Ukrainian armoured vehicles. Western leaders are looking on, hoping that Prigozhin's death reveals disarray within the Russian leadership, fatal divisions that will undermine the invasion of Ukraine.
We know this pattern in Russia, in Putin's Russia. Deaths and dubious suicides, falls from windows that ultimately remain unexplained. This underlines the fact that a dictatorial power system that is built on violence knows only violence, at home and abroad.
In Niger, in West Africa, some are still hoping that the Wagner Group will come to save them. From what, it's not quite clear. After the coup last month, they're making Russian flags to replace the French tricolore. Prigozhin has become something of a cult figure in the Sahel, despite evidence of massacres and plunder carried out by Wagner mercenaries. Who knows what will happen to them now? The co-founder of the Wagner Group, Dmitry Utkin, a neo-Nazi, caught here unusually smiling, is also being mourned by Wagner soldiers. In this video, Prigozhin and he chat about death. Not the end, but a new beginning, says Utkin. Prigozhin replies, "We will all go to hell, but in hell we will be the best."
Well, earlier I spoke to Mikhail Kasyanov. He's now a Russian opposition politician. But from 2000 to 2004, he was Russia's prime minister under Vladimir Putin. I began by asking him whether we can assume that Putin is behind the presumed death of Yevgeny Prigozhin.
Yeah, I have no doubt about that. That was inevitable that Putin would liquidate Prigozhin because of simple reason, just Putin is not capable to forgive. But Prigozhin created a big problem for Mr. Putin. No one humiliated Putin for all his 23 years in power, but Prigozhin did, and Putin could not forgive this.
The manner of the killing is highly significant. You know, normally you expect Putin or people behind Putin to look at poisoning, for example, but the message that he's sending from this is far more brutal, far more public.
Everyone in ruling elite understand that that was Putin's desire and was Putin's instruction or whatever how you call it. It doesn't matter just in which form it went. But that Putin behind is absolutely sure. No one is doubting about that.
Can Putin count on the loyalty of people within the Wagner Group, or is it possible that Prigozhin becomes a martyr and, many other potential rivals, challengers to Putin now emerge?
I don't think so. First, the Wagner Group, Prigozhin, the Utkin, or any other commanders of Wagner Group and the participants and the fighters, they were not against Putin. Prigozhin's mutiny was not against Putin. He pressed Putin to implement his requests, first to provide him with money, and secondly to adopt the law to legalize his existence. Because till now in Russia, and according to Russian legislation, Wagner, it is illegal organization, military illegal organization.
So does Putin now emerge stronger from this or weaker? And is Russia more unstable after this, if it is indeed an assassination?
On one hand, just Putin believes he became stronger. On the other hand, just he absolutely, that was a must for him to liquidate Prigozhin. Putin believes that he strengthening the situation, but I think that would creating a risk. Next year, so-called elections should take place, presidential elections. Putin will reinvigorate himself once again, just appoint himself. But people around and people in the country, even every policeman would understand that it was falsified election, that it would be falsified elections. Putin would lose the whole legitimacy he believes he has. But that's what I'm saying. Next year will be difficult for Putin. And Prigozhin created first problems, and he, by his mutiny, already just opened the way for the end of Putin's regime.
Well, the end of Putin's regime, but the biggest risk comes from the people of Russia, not the people around Putin or just below Putin.
First, it comes from the people around Putin, not just to liquidate Putin, of course not, but to make him weaker, not implementing his instructions and his order. That would depends, first of all, about these people. And secondly, of course, we all continue to believe that Ukrainian counteroffensive would achieve appropriate results. Maybe not this year, but for next year, that's definitely the case. Sooner or later, Ukraine would achieve, decisive achievements, decisive advantage on the battlefield, and that would be creation of another fear in Russia, and Putin will be seen as weak, not pragmatic and successful leader, but as a fanatic.
You just foresaw the end of Putin. How soon do you think?
I believe that, as I said, next year, so-called presidential elections, just a reinauguration. It's not elections, it's just imitation of that. But Putin definitely wants and needs this because he wants to demonstrate to himself, to people around, and for majority of Russians that the whole Russia supports him. He will demonstrate the support like 80%, but in reality, people would start understanding more and more that they didn't vote for him, and that I'm saying his legitimacy would disappear in totality. And because of that result, I think that Putin would start realizing it soon, and I don't exclude he will step down by himself by the end of next year. It would depend also on the success of Ukrainian counteroffensive operation.
Does Prigozhin's death make a ceasefire more or less likely?
It does. There is no connection with it at all. That is internal. I would say settlement of the problems between two people here. Because I would say, in a criminal way, and criminal friendship and criminal settlement.
Like The Godfather?
Yeah, something like that.
Mikhail Kasyanov, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Candice Rondeau is director of the Future Frontlines programme at the New America Foundation and an expert on the Wagner Group. I spoke to her earlier and began by asking what the events of the last 24 hours could mean for the rest of the world beyond Russia.
I think what it means is Vladimir Putin intends to make sure that there is never another challenge like we saw 2 months ago when Yevgeny Prigozhin marched on Moscow. And more importantly, I think it shows that he is still nonetheless determined to keep investing in these irregular paramilitary forces, but he'd like to see them a little bit more cogently operated.
So you think that Russia will continue to send mercenaries across the world, as Wagner did, for example, across Africa?
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt about that. Before there was a Wagner Group, there were other types of mercenary organizations. We know that, for instance, the Moran Security Group was one of the first to deploy Dmitry Utkin out to Syria. And so we should expect that tradition will continue. It's a long tradition that dates back all the way to the Soviet days.
When you look at the fact that Prigozhin is presumed dead, other senior generals or commanders who have been in some way crucial in Ukraine are either jailed or dismissed. Could this be, in years to come, we might look back and see this as the point that the war turned in Ukraine's favour?
I think the war tipped in Ukraine's favor the minute that Yevgeny Prigozhin set foot on the pavement in his march to justice on June 24th of 2023. That was the moment when it was kind of lights out for him. He was dead man walking. There was no question that at some point Vladimir Putin would take his revenge in some way or another, or if he didn't, that somebody else would. It was kind of a foregone conclusion that the Wagner Group would be sort of rebranded and potentially even resurrected in some other form. That's just sort of the nature of the business.
And there seems to be a consensus that Putin is weakened, destabilized. Can you actually see the end of the Putin regime in sight, or is it premature to say that?
I certainly think that the Wagner Group episode in this season of Putin's downfall certainly accelerates the path toward the expiry of his influence in Russia. There is no question that people close to Putin must be asking themselves, how long can this go on? How long can we allow this kind of shambolic management of national resources?
And so they might be less willing to carry out his orders, but they're not going to be brave enough or foolish enough to try and topple him, are they?
Everybody understands that what awaits them after Putin is gone, whether by natural causes or others, is basically more chaos. And if not chaos, then the hand of justice. Somewhere, someday, those who are responsible for the many atrocities that Russia has been responsible for over the last several years will pay a price. And so they're incredibly incentivized to at least keep him kind of in power, even as a figurehead, until they can figure out a game plan for unwinding some of what he has done.
So how should America, Europe, the UK deal with Putin then, and deal with a country that is being described by some as a mafia state?
The only way forward is deterrence and pressure. That is the only way. There were some serious mistakes made in 2014 when the US and Europe decided to kind of turn the other way and sort of softly chide Mr. Putin after the first invasion of Crimea and then Donbass. This was a huge mistake, and we're now reaping, unfortunately, the very, very sour seeds of that mistake. Right, the next, leader of the White House, the future leaders of Europe, are going to have to make a commitment to continue to accelerate and enhance the pressure on Russia to at least do one important thing, which is to mind its own borders.
Candice Rondeau, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.